You know, the debate over the economic impact of unauthorized immigration, it's always so heated, right? But for all that noise, what if the entire conversation has been missing the one thing it needs most? Real hard data. Well, today we're going to dive into a groundbreaking academic study that claims to provide just that, giving us a rare, evidence-based look at this really complex issue. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about the crucial data gap that's really held this debate back. Then, we'll look at the unique case study that allowed researchers to finally fill that gap. After that, we'll get into the really juicy stuff, the findings on economic growth and the job market. And then finally, we'll pull it all together and ask, okay, so what does this all mean for policy? All right, so first things first, why was a study like this even necessary? Well, let's start with the fundamental problem that has kept this whole debate pretty much stuck in the mud for decades. This is the big one, isn't it? It seems like such a simple question, but what the data shows is an answer that is way, way more complicated than most people think. The wild thing is, despite all the strong opinions out there, the reality is that for years, this entire conversation has been running on fumes. There's been a critical lack of hard evidence, which has made it almost impossible to move past theoretical models and, political talking points. And this slide really gets to the core of the challenge for researchers. I mean, most economists pretty much agree that high-skilled immigration is a net positive. But when you get to low-skilled immigration, oh boy, that's where the debate gets fierce. Does it fill labor shortages or does it push down wages? The problem has always been that massive data gap. It is incredibly difficult to get reliable numbers on undocumented populations, and that's left this huge blind spot in the research. And that is exactly what this study was designed to fix. So how in the world did these researchers overcome that data gap? Well, they found a really unique situation that created what's called a natural experiment, which is basically a real-world scenario that lets you see cause and effect without being in a lab. And listen, we are not talking about a small sample here. This is a huge, incredibly detailed data set covering 3 full decades of quarterly data. It allowed the researchers to finally move beyond assumptions and actually analyze what's happening in the real world with a level of detail that's been pretty much unheard of until now. The study starts by identifying a very specific group, unauthorized border crossers. These are folks who entered Israel illegally, on foot, almost all of them coming from crisis-hit nations in Africa. Now, what's really critical here is that they're considered long-term migrants, and they are overwhelmingly low-skilled. Now, the second group is a completely different story. These are visa overstayers, people who came into the country legally with a visa for work or tourism, but just didn't leave when it expired. This group is a mix of both high and low-skilled people, and unlike the border crossers, they're classified as short-term migrants. And this right here, this brings us to one of the study's first really big contributions. The term unauthorized immigrant isn't just one thing. It's not a monolith. These two groups have totally different profiles, and as we're about to see, lumping them all together just completely hides what's really going on with their economic impact. Okay, now for the core findings. What happened when the researchers actually tracked these two distinct groups against the biggest measure of economic health we have, GDP growth? The results are, well, they're pretty striking. As you'd probably expect, skilled visa overstayers had a positive correlation with GDP growth. But here's the shocker. The low-skilled border crossers, that long-term group, they also had a positive correlation with GDP growth. And in total contrast, the low-skilled visa overstayers were linked to a negative impact. So let's just pause on that. The crucial point here is that the economic outcome is completely dependent on which specific group of unauthorized immigrants you're looking at. The long-term, low-skilled border crossers actually correlated with positive growth, and that really challenges the conventional wisdom that all low-skilled unauthorized immigration is a drag on the economy. To put a number on it, a 1% increase in those low-skilled border crossers was associated with a 0.026 percentage point increase in GDP growth. Now, it's not a massive number, but it's a statistically significant positive contribution. Okay, but now compare that to the other low-skilled group. A 1% increase in low-skilled visa overstayers was linked to a 0.115 percentage point decrease in GDP growth. I mean, that is a dramatic difference, and it just shows how important it is to distinguish between these populations. Okay, but GDP is one thing. What about the concern we hear all the time in this debate? The impact on jobs and wages for native-born workers. Let's see what the data has to say about that. this is the real heart of the matter for so many people. The fear is that immigrants, especially low-skilled ones, are going to come in and take jobs away from citizens. Well, the findings on this are fascinating. High-skilled immigrants were actually associated with lower unemployment among native-born workers. And for the low-skilled groups, for both the border crossers and the visa overstayers, the study found no statistically significant impact on the native unemployment rate at all. So the conclusion from this part of the analysis is really clear. The data suggests these immigrants are complementing the native workforce, not competing with it. It seems like they're filling gaps in the labor market, taking roles that the local population tends to avoid, which means they aren't causing widespread displacement. And this quote from the study just captures the conclusion perfectly. Based on all the data for both unemployment and wages, the researchers conclude that the economic benefits of this type of immigration seem to outweigh the possible risks for the local labor force. So after digging through all this data, what are the big takeaways? How should these findings shape the way we think and maybe the way we make policy? All right, let's recap the crucial points here. First, and this is the big one, unauthorized immigrant is not a monolithic category. Second, the fear of widespread job displacement for native workers, well, it just wasn't supported by this data. Third, skilled immigrants gave a significant boost to the economy. And finally, the biggest surprise, long-term, low-skilled border crossers were also linked to positive GDP growth. And ultimately, this is what all the research points to. A one-size-fits-all policy, one that's based on these broad assumptions about a really diverse population, is probably going to be ineffective. It's going to miss the mark. Crafting smart, effective immigration policy means you have to understand these nuances and make decisions based on evidence, not just theory. And that leaves us with a final thought. This study shows that real data can cut through a lot of the noise in this debate. So if we stop asking the simple question of whether unauthorized immigration is good or bad, what are the new questions we should be asking? Maybe the real challenge now is figuring out how to design intelligent policies that can tell the difference between these groups, policies that can mitigate the risks from some while maximizing the benefits from others.